Welcome to War Bios, the podcast where we delve into the most pivotal battles in history, and I'm your host, General Biography. Today, we're going to explore one of the most epic and brutal sieges in modern military history, the Battle of Sevastopol. This grueling campaign, fought during the Crimean War, saw the Russian Empire clash with an alliance of French, British, and Ottoman forces in a struggle that would test the mettle of soldiers, generals, and empires alike. The Crimean War was sparked by a complex web of alliances, territorial disputes, and nationalist tensions that had been simmering for decades. In the early 1850s, Russia, under the leadership of Tsar Nicholas I, sought to expand its influence in the Black Sea region, which led to a confrontation with the Ottoman Empire. The Ottomans, facing internal strife and external pressure, turned to their traditional allies, Britain and France, for support. The spark that ignited the war was the dispute over control of the Holy Land, a contentious issue between Russia and the Ottoman Empire. However, the underlying causes were far more complex, involving Russian ambitions to gain access to the Mediterranean and challenge British dominance of the seas. The French, meanwhile, saw an opportunity to weaken their historical rival, Austria, and assert their own influence in Europe. As tensions escalated, the Russians occupied the Danubian principalities, which are now part of modern-day Romania, prompting the Ottomans to declare war in October 1853. The British and French, committed to defending the balance of power in Europe, soon followed suit. The war's early stages saw a series of skirmishes and battles along the Danube River, but it was the Russian naval base at Sevastopol on the Crimean Peninsula that would become the focal point of the conflict. Sevastopol, situated on the southern coast of Crimea, was a strategic gem, providing Russia with a year-round ice-free port and access to the Black Sea. The city was also home to the Russian Black Sea Fleet, which posed a significant threat to Ottoman and Allied shipping. For the Russians, Sevastopol was an indispensable asset. For the Allies, it was a critical objective that had to be neutralized if they were to gain control of the Black Sea. In the summer of 1854, the Allies, led by British General Lord Raglan and French General Jacques Leroy de Saint-Arnaud, began to assemble a massive armada off the coast of Crimea. Their plan was to capture Sevastopol, thereby crippling the Russian naval presence in the region and paving the way for a broader campaign against Russia itself. As the Allies prepared to launch their assault on Sevastopol, the Russians were busy fortifying the city's defenses. Under the command of Admiral Vladimir Kornilov and General Pavel Nakhimov, the Russian garrison worked tirelessly to strengthen the city walls, erect barricades, and prepare for the impending siege. Meanwhile, the Allied forces were grappling with their own set of challenges, from logistical nightmares to diplomatic tensions between the British and French high commands. As the Allies began their assault on Sevastopol, the Russians were well prepared to defend their strategic stronghold. On September 13, 1854, the Allied forces landed at Kalamita Bay, approximately 35 miles north of Sevastopol, with a massive army of over 50,000 troops. The British and French armies then marched towards Sevastopol, intent on capturing the city and its vital harbor. However, they soon found themselves facing a series of formidable Russian defensive lines, cleverly constructed to funnel the attackers into kill zones. The first major engagement of the siege occurred on September 20, 1854, at the Battle of Alma, where the Allies clashed with a large Russian army under General Prince Menshikov. The Russians had taken up positions on the high ground above the Alma River, but the British and French successfully breached their lines, forcing the Russians to retreat towards Sevastopol. Although the Allies suffered heavy casualties, they had gained a crucial victory, which paved the way for the siege of Sevastopol. As the Allies approached the city, they began to lay siege to the Russian defenses, using their superior artillery to bombard the city walls and fortifications. The Russians, however, were not easily intimidated and responded with fierce counter-battery fire, inflicting significant casualties on the Allied gunners. On October 17, 1854, the Allies launched a massive bombardment of the city, firing over 30,000 rounds into Sevastopol, but the Russian defenses held firm. One of the most notable events of the siege was the heroic defense of the Malakoff Redoubt, a strategic strongpoint that dominated the approaches to Sevastopol. On October 17, 1854, a British naval brigade, supported by French troops, launched a daring assault on the redoubt, but were repelled with heavy losses. The Russians had cleverly designed the defenses to channel the attackers into narrow killing zones, where they could be cut down by concentrated artillery and rifle fire. As the siege dragged on, both sides suffered heavily from disease, cold, and hunger. The Allied armies were plagued by cholera and dysentery, which decimated their ranks, while the Russians struggled to maintain their defenses in the face of overwhelming odds. Despite these challenges, the Russians continued to fight with remarkable tenacity, inspired by the heroic leadership of Admiral Vladimir Kornilov, who had become a legendary figure among the defenders. As the siege entered its 6th month, it became clear that the outcome would depend on which side could endure the most suffering and emerge victorious in the end. The winter of 1854-55 was particularly brutal, with temperatures plummeting to 20 degrees and snowdrifts reaching as high as 10 feet. The Allied armies struggled to maintain their siege lines, while the Russians took advantage of the harsh weather to launch surprise attacks on the Allied positions. On February 5, 1855, a Russian sortie caught the British off guard, inflicting significant casualties and destroying several key gun emplacements. As the winter of 1854-55 slowly receded, the Allies began to regain the initiative, launching a series of attacks on the Russian defenses. On April 8, 1855, the British and French launched a massive bombardment of the city, firing over 40,000 rounds into Sevastopol, causing widespread destruction and weakening the Russian defenses. The Russians, however, continued to fight tenaciously, using every available means to harass and disrupt the Allied armies. On June 18, 1855, the Allies launched a final assault on the Malakoff redoubt, which had become the key to the city's defenses. After a fierce and bloody battle, the French finally captured the redoubt, paving the way for the fall of Sevastopol. On September 9, 1855, the Russians evacuated the city, marking the end of the siege. The Battle of Sevastopol was one of the longest and bloodiest sieges of the modern era, with both sides suffering heavily. The Allies had lost over 100,000 men, while the Russians had lost an estimated 200,000. As the Russian officer Leo Tolstoy, who fought in the battle, later observed, the defenders of Sevastopol were not simply fighting for a city, but for their country, their honor, and their very way of life. In the aftermath of the battle, the Treaty of Paris was signed on March 30, 1856, marking the end of the Crimean War. The treaty imposed significant limitations on Russian power in the Black Sea and led to a period of modernization and reform within the Russian military. Today, the Battle of Sevastopol is remembered as a testament to the bravery and endurance of the soldiers who fought in it. The city itself has been rebuilt and restored, with many of its historic fortifications and landmarks preserved as museums and memorials. As one walks through the streets of modern-day Sevastopol, it is impossible not to be struck by the weight of history that hangs in the air. The Battle of Sevastopol also had a profound impact on the development of modern warfare, with its use of trench warfare, artillery bombardments, and siege tactics foreshadowing the horrors of World War I. As the historian John Sweetman has noted, the Crimean War was the first truly modern war, with all the characteristics that would come to define 20th century conflict. In conclusion, the Battle of Sevastopol was a pivotal moment in modern history, marking the beginning of a new era of warfare and cementing the reputation of the city as a symbol of bravery and sacrifice. That's all for today's War Bios. Remember to like, share, and subscribe, and until next time, I'm General Biography reminding you to keep marching toward victory.